of a deception. It's a puppet master's tool. And I've seen those craft shut down the silos from 10 miles away. And there ain't nothing that the Pentagon can do. They can't make them go away.
From Malmstrom to Manhattan, Boston to LA, there are people asking questions and they will not go away. But what has been seen might not be what it seems. The government's shadows dance and deceive. From Malmstrom to Manhattan, New York to LA, you can't get the picture if they're pale or they're gray. But what we have seen might not be what it seems when the government's shadows dance and deceive.
If you would like to hear Night Dreams Talk Radio on your local radio station, let them know. Tell them to check out www.nightdreamstalkradio.com. And thank you.
You can advertise your business on Night Dreams Talk Radio, and you will be heard worldwide. Why not contact us at nightdreamstalkradio@gmail.com. You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio After Dark with our host, Gary Anderson.
And here it is. This is a few days before Christmas, so I just can't wait for Christmas this year. But with these Great Danes, we came and put a tree out this year. What can I say? Well, we're back with Richard and Linda Smith. We're talking about their abductions. Well, who wants to start on now? Richard, do you want to pick up, or does Linda want to pick up? Let's just go from here.
He just walked away to turn the heat off.
Aha.
Okay, he's back.
I'm right here.
Pick up. What did you want to pick up with?
Well, again, now, when you, Richard, when you were 21 years old and you realized that something was going on, I mean, did you tell your parents or, relatives, friends, anything about what was going on?
Yes, I always had an open dialogue with my parents about things like that. And I think Linda and I are prime examples of coming from polar opposite equations. Linda was always in an environment where she was afraid to talk about it until later in life, whereas I was brought up in an atmosphere where it was commonplace, and talking about it was supported and encouraged. I had a mother who I had a grandmother who had psychic abilities for foresight. She could see things coming down the pike, things coming in the near future. How she did that, I have no idea, but it was in the family bloodline. My mother had a very rebellious gene in her, okay? So she was the kind that would buck the system, and that was passed on to my brother and I. When I was a kid, I was raised on Star Trek and Star Wars and Buck Rogers and all that, but my mom would sit there and show me, how science fiction related directly to aliens in the Bible. So she would sit there with the Bible and point out to me, as a kid, the references to UFOs and extraterrestrial contact and aliens. And then she would swear me to secrecy and say, because I was going to Catholic school at the time, and she would say, if you ever repeat this to anyone, I will disown you. Do not tell anyone that I'm showing you this.
Interesting.
Because, she knew she wasn't exactly, Mom of the Year in the eyes of the PTA and the Parents Teachers Association, she didn't exactly go along with that crowd because she had her own way of viewing things in life and wasn't afraid to express it or pass it on to my brother and I. My dad was also the kind who encouraged it and saw it as a real thing. Of course, when I say it, I'm referring to alien contact, UFO phenomena, extraterrestrial intervention, ancient aliens, and all that. In fact, he came from he grew up on things like Bonanza and Chuck Wagon, but also Twilight Zone and Outer Limits. So for him, when Star Trek released Star Trek Deep Space Nine, that was the one Star Trek series he absolutely loved because for him it was like watching Bonanza in space, where all the problems came to the ranch, or in this case, the space station. So there's all that my brother and I were raised on openly. So when things like films like Close Encounters of the Third Kind came along, or later in the 80s, Communion, the film adaptation of Whitley Strieber's book, or the TV movie Intruders, which was the adaptation of Bud Hopkins and John Mack's book, Intruders, it came as no surprise to us. That was just reality manifesting from what we already knew as kids. And for us, we were lucky to have parents like that fostered it and didn't discourage it and wanted open discussion on it, because we were the children of the 80s, and that was the best time to be raised in because you had all of that around you that made it possible to realize, oh, this is not far-fetched. This is commonplace. This is everyday. There's nothing outlandish about it. There's nothing to be fearful of being ostracized by. And that helped both my brother and I get into adulthood to openly listen to and talk to other people about it, to the point where even when, we still cross paths with people who would laugh at it, but when they come face to face with somebody like myself who has that level of confidence, it makes it very hard for them to make fun of it in a malicious way like they did to Linda when she was growing up. Because I had an environment that fostered that kind of confidence and made it a real thing and showed it as a reality, not something to sweep under the rug and be embarrassed of, like in the good old days when you weren't allowed to talk about cancer because that was embarrassing to talk about.
Well, I got a question to ask you, Richard. Now, was your brother abducted too?
He had experiences with me. As far as he by himself, I don't know.
Now, has any of that done any emotional distress to you guys, you or your brother?
No, it's made us stronger. Granted, a lot of that comes from our parental upbringing, but the experiences themselves have, I think, in many ways, given both him and I a much stronger backbone for things like that, to not be afraid to talk about it, not be afraid to admit to it, and also be there as kind of like a leaning post or a shoulder or ear, open ear, to listen to other people who aren't so sure about talking about it and need a good listener to open up to.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Now, Linda, how about you? At 4 years old, it's really hard to make a decision on your, if you're seeing these, how, at a 4-year-old, you wouldn't know that there were aliens or spirits or something else,
right.
How did it affect you as a young girl? I mean, when you grew up, did you have, problems, or were you undecided about your, being a young girl? What was going on? If it was good, bad, you didn't know? I just want to know what your feeling was. And that's important for the listeners to know.
Yeah. It was a something that my sister and I kept secret. It was something between the two of us. Having sometimes nightly visits was, like Rick said, it was commonplace for us, but we didn't share it with anybody, especially after the few times that I did try to share it with my friends, and kind of made fun of. I didn't even make an attempt to share it with anybody else, especially my parents. I grew up my father was a very strict person. I wasn't allowed to have an opinion. I wasn't allowed to have a voice. I wasn't allowed to speak my mind. So I grew up a very quiet, reserved, shy person. And it wasn't until I was 31 when I finally, in 1995, told my mom, and my sister told my mom about what we had experienced growing up. For me, it was a normal thing to be around these beings, but it was also normal for me to keep it quiet to my family and friends.
A 4-year-old, I would think, because I have 8 children, they're now all adults. I mean, some of them are in their 40s. That tells you how old I am. But it makes me, a 4-year-old, I just know how my kids were at 4 years old. If anything went on, they were the first one to come running, and tell us. My daughter, when she was 4 or 5 years old, you remember that movie Poltergeist?
Yep.
Okay, she would watch that. I mean, till I got to the point I had to get rid of the VHS tape and get it out of the house, because she would watch it one after over and over. And then, she would tell us, what, I got this friend here. I didn't believe her till one day. We had like 3 cats, and she was in the front room talking to her friend, or supposedly to her friend, and the cats were, all 3 of them were looking at the same thing, same area. And, and their ears were, up, and like they could hear something was going on.
Yep.
And then I went and told my wife, I don't know what is going on, but I think she is talking to somebody we can't see. But a 4-year-old, has, I hate to say it, it's hard for them to keep secrets. So I just, I can't understand why you wouldn't have went up to your mom and dad, or at least to your mom if your dad was strict, and say, hey, something, and explain, hey, I have a friend, or I have friends that are coming to see me.
I know. I understand. I completely understand what you're saying, and I wish I could say that I remember, I did try to contact my mom or tell my mom about. I don't remember. Honestly, do not remember why I didn't. But once my secret, quote unquote, was out in the 90s, mid 90s, to my mom, I made it a point to not be that way with my kids. We started, and this was after my youngest, who's going to be 24 next month. When she was about 3, she had friends, just like you said your daughter did. And she was the youngest of 4. There was a 6-year difference between my youngest son and my youngest daughter. So they were all in school. She was home with me and my mom, and we'd hear her talking in the bedroom. And one day I finally said, who are you talking to? And she said, very matter-of-factly, Cadus and Betis. And my mother and I looked at each other like, okay, here we go. I said, who's Cadus and Betis? And she went on to say, one is a doctor, one is a teacher. They teach me math, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. I wrote it all in The Kings Are Coming, but I didn't make her feel like she was making things up or she was crazy. I let her say what she had to say, and I kept open communication. I didn't want her or any of my other kids